The anesthesia was still heavy in my veins when my mother patted my hand and told me everything was taken care of. I thought she meant the hospital bill. I did not know that while a surgeon was cutting into me, my parents were signing a deed at a title company, selling the condo I had spent 10 years working for. They sold my sanctuary for $425,000, all because I trusted them to hold a pen. Unit 4B was the first thing I ever truly owned. It was a corner unit on the third floor of a converted brick warehouse in a neighborhood that was transitioning from industrial grit to coffee shop chic. The floors were original maple, scarred and honey-colored, and the windows were tall enough that I had to stand on a stepladder to clean the top panes. I bought it for $425,000. I say that number out loud sometimes, letting the syllables roll around in my mouth like a hard candy, just to remind myself that I did it. I put 20% down. I signed the mortgage papers with a hand that did not shake. For a 32-year-old project manager who had spent her 20s bailing her parents out of credit card debt, failed multi-level marketing schemes, and impulsive car purchases, that condo was not just real estate, it was a fortress. It was proof that I existed outside of the chaos of Linda and Frank Clark. When the doctor told me I needed surgery, my first thought was not about the pain or the recovery time. It was about the logistics of my autonomy. It was a structural issue, a necessary repair to my abdominal wall that had been giving me trouble for years. It was not cosmetic, and it was not optional. "You will be down for 6 weeks," the surgeon had said, looking at me over his spectacles. "No lifting anything heavier than a milk jug. No driving for at least 10 days. You will need help." I knew what help looked like in my family. Help was a currency that came with high interest rates. I tried to set boundaries early, 2 weeks before the scheduled date. I sat my parents down at a neutral location, a diner halfway between my condo and their rented duplex. "I have hired a post-op nurse for the first 3 days. I told them. I kept my voice even, professional. After that, Sarah is going to check on me. I have pre-cooked meals in the freezer. I have groceries delivered. You do not need to worry." My mother, Linda, looked at me with wide, wounded eyes. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. "Zoe," she said, "you are having major surgery. You are not going to be alone with a stranger. We are your parents. We will take care of you." "I don't want to be a burden," I said, which was code for "I don't want you in my space." "Nonsense," my father, Frank, said. He was attacking his pancakes with aggressive precision. "You will stay with us. We have the guest room ready. It makes the most sense. Why pay a nurse when family is free?" They wore me down. They always did. It was a war of attrition where they had infinite stamina for guilt, and I had a finite supply of patience. I agreed to stay at their house for the first week, but I refused to let them pack up my apartment. I told myself it was just 7 days. I could survive 7 days. The night before the surgery, the air in my condo felt heavy. I was packing a duffel bag with sweatpants and loose shirts when the buzzer rang. I hadn't buzzed them in, but they had a key, for emergencies only, a boundary they treated as a suggestion. They came in with a gust of forced cheer and the smell of tuna casserole. My mother was carrying a stack of Tupperware, and my father was clutching a manila folder to his chest like a shield. "We just wanted to get you settled before the big day," my mother chirped. Ignoring my open suitcase, she started rearranging my kitchen counters, moving my coffee maker to the left, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. "You know how you get anxious." "I'm not anxious," I said, feeling my heart rate climb. "I'm prepared." "Of course you are," my father said. He sat at my kitchen island, placing the folder on the quartz countertop. "Sit down, Zoe. We need to go over a few administrative things, just housekeeping." I walked over, my socks sliding on the maple floors I loved so much. "What administrative things?" "It is just for while you are under," my father said. He opened the folder. Inside was a document, thick and dense with legal text. "Your mother and I were thinking, if there is a billing issue at the hospital, or if the HOA needs to get in here for a leak, or if insurance denies a claim while you are on the heavy meds, we need to be able to handle it for you, We don't want you stressing about paperwork when you should be healing. I looked at the document. It was a power of attorney. I had seen them before in my work. Usually specific, limited scopes for contractors. This one looked denser. This seems like a lot just for medical billing, I said. I reached for the paper, but my father's hand rested heavily near the top edge. It is standard, my mother said, coming up behind me and placing her hands on my shoulders. She began to massage my neck, her thumbs digging into the tension there. We downloaded it from a legal website. It just lets us be your voice when you can't speak. Remember when Aunt Martha had her hip done and her insurance lapsed because she missed a mail notification? We are just protecting you from collection issues. I can read it over, I said, trying to pull away from the massage. I can sign it in the morning if it looks okay. The notary is already on his way, my father said, checking his watch. Buddy of mine, he is doing us a favor coming this late. We need to get this done so we can get you to the hospital on time tomorrow. You know how early check-in is. I felt the walls of the kitchen closing in. I was 32 years old, a professional woman who managed million-dollar budgets. Yet in their presence, I reverted to a scared teenager. I looked around my condo, the art on the walls, the stack of books on the side table, the life I had built. I wanted to protect it. I don't know, I said. My father's face softened. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture that always signaled he was disappointed in my lack of trust. Zoe, he said quietly, we are your parents. We won't let anything happen. Do you really think we would do anything to hurt you? After everything we have been through? The doorbell rang. It was the notary, a short, sweating man who smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. He bustled in, stamping his seal on the table before I had even fully agreed. My mother put a pen in my hand. For your peace of mind, sweetie, just sign it so we can focus on getting you well. I looked at the signature line. I looked at my father's earnest, tired face. I looked at my mother's hopeful smile. I was exhausted. I was scared of the surgery. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that for once, they were just being parents. I signed. The pen scratched against the paper. A sound that seemed incredibly loud in the quiet apartment. The recovery room was a world of white light and beeping machines. I woke up feeling like my body was filled with wet sand. My throat was raw from the breathing tube. I blinked, trying to bring the room into focus. My mother was sitting in the plastic chair next to the bed. She was holding my phone. Mom? I croaked. She didn't look up immediately. Her thumbs were flying across the screen. Shh, go back to sleep. Honey, everything went fine. My phone, I whispered. Why do you have my phone? She finally looked at me, smiling that tight, bright smile she used for neighbors and creditors. Oh, it was just blowing up with texts. Work people, friends. I didn't want the buzzing to wake you, so I'm just handling it, telling everyone you are resting. It is easier this way. Give it to me, I said, but my arm felt like lead. I couldn't lift it. In a bit, she said, sliding the phone into her purse. You rest now. I drifted back under, but a seed of panic had been planted in my chest. Beside her, on the rolling table, I saw her iPad propped up. The screen was glowing. I recognized the interface. It was my Gmail inbox. She was logged in. I tried to speak, to tell her to log out, but the drugs pulled me down into the dark water again. The next week was a blur of pain medication and the beige walls of my parents' guest bedroom. I was weak, dependent on them for water, for food, for help walking to the bathroom. They were solicitous, hovering constantly. My father brought me soup. My mother fluffed my pillows, but they were gatekeepers. Sarah called? I asked on the third day. She did, my mother said, smoothing the duvet. I told her you weren't up for visitors yet. She understands. I want my phone, I said. Doctor, Evan said no screens. My mother lied. I knew she was lying. I had read the pre-op packet. The blue light interferes with the healing sleep. I was too weak to fight. I slept. I ate the soup. I waited for the fog to clear. By day 7, the pain had receded to a dull throb. I waited until my mother went to the grocery store and my father was in the garage tinkering with his lawnmower. I crawled out of bed, gritting my teeth against the pull in my abdomen, and found my bag in the closet. My phone was gone, but my iPad was tucked in the side pocket. I sat on the floor of the closet, shivering, and powered it on. It connected to the house Wi-Fi. Notifications cascaded down the screen. Dozens of unread emails. I scrolled through them, my heart hammering against my ribs. Get well soon e-cards, work updates, spam, and then a subject line that made the world stop spinning. Transaction closed. 1402. River Street, Unit 4B. I stared at it. It didn't make sense. River Street was my address. I opened the email. It was from a title company. Dear seller, please find attached the final closing statement for your records. The wire transfer has been initiated. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the tablet. I backed out to the inbox. 2 emails down. There was another one. Congratulations on your new home. It was from a realtor named Deborah Vance. I didn't know a Deborah Vance. The preview text read, "It was a pleasure representing you in this swift transaction. I know letting go of a property is emotional, but you made the right choice for your financial future." I felt like I was going to throw up. The bile rose in my throat, hot and acidic. They had sold it. In the 7 days I had been lying in this beige room, drugged and pliable. They had sold my home. I heard the front door open. My mother's footsteps clicked on the linoleum. "Zoe," she called out, "I got those crackers you like." I used the closet door frame to pull myself up. I walked out into the hallway, clutching the iPad to my chest. My mother was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries. My father was coming in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. They both looked up. They saw my face. They saw the tablet. The air in the room changed instantly. The solicitude evaporated, replaced by a defensive, brittle hardness. "You sold my condo," I said. My voice sounded thin, foreign to my own ears. My mother didn't gasp. She didn't look shocked. She set a jar of peanut butter down on the counter with a deliberate thud. "Zoe, honey, you need to sit down. You are trembling." "You sold my condo," I repeated, louder this time. "I saw the email, the closing statement." "We had to," my father said. He didn't look at me. He looked at the grease on his hands. "We did it to protect you." "Protect me?" I screamed, ignoring the sharp pain in my stomach. "You sold my house. How is that protecting me?" "The market is turning, Zoe," my mother said, her voice taking on that reasonable, lecturing tone she used when explaining why she couldn't pay me back for a loan. "We spoke to a specialist. The bubble is about to burst. If we hadn't acted now, you would have been underwater in 6 months. We got you out at the peak." "I didn't want to get out," I yelled. "I live there. It is my home." "It was a liability," my father said. "You have medical bills coming. You have recovery time. You needed the liquidity. You were drowning, Zoe, and you wouldn't admit it." "I have insurance." I stepped forward, shaking the iPad at them. "I have savings. I wasn't drowning." My mother walked over to the kitchen drawer and pulled out an envelope. She held it out to me. "We put this aside for you. It is the proceeds. Well, some of them. We had to pay off the mortgage, obviously, and the closing costs, and the realtor fees." I took the envelope. I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check made out to me. $50,000. "The condo sold for $425,000, I said. "I owed $200 on the mortgage. Where is the rest? Where is the other $175,000? My parents exchanged a look. A quick, flickering glance that communicated entire paragraphs of history. "Debts," my mother said vaguely. "Old liens. Things that were attached to your name that you didn't know about. We cleared it all up for you. You are debt-free now. Zoe, you have a fresh start. $50,000 is a lot of money." "Show me the closing statement," I demanded. Show me exactly where that money went. You are not thinking clearly, my father said, stepping between me and my mother. His physical presence, usually comforting, now felt menacing. The pain medication makes you paranoid. You are confused. I am not confused, I hissed. I want the paperwork. Now. We will go over it when you are better, my mother said, turning her back to me to put away the milk. Right now, you are hysterical. This is exactly why we needed the power of attorney. You are not capable of handling this stress. I retreated to the guest room because I had nowhere else to go. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. My home was gone. Strangers were probably walking on my maple floors right now. An hour later, there was a knock at the front door. I heard voices. High, tense voices. I recognized one of them. Sarah, I whispered. I forced myself up again. I walked to the living room. Sarah was standing in the entryway, looking fierce. She was wearing her work blazer and holding a coffee shop cup. My father was blocking her path. Zoe! Sarah shouted when she saw me. She tried to step around my father, but he moved to block her. She is not up for visitors, my father growled. I want to talk to her, Sarah said. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my pale face, my trembling hands. Zoe, are you okay? You haven't answered any texts. They sold my condo, I blurted out. Sarah's mouth fell open. They what? She is confused, my mother shouted from the kitchen. She is hallucinating from the oxycodone. Sarah, I think you need to leave. You are upsetting her. You are a bad influence. I want to see the papers. Mr. Clark, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a steely calm. If you sold her property, there is a paper trail. Show me the power of attorney. Get out of my house, my father said. He pointed a finger at the door. This is a family matter. You are not family. Zoe, Sarah said, ignoring him. Do you want me to call the police? My heart stopped. The police? If I called the police on my parents, there was no going back. That was the nuclear option. I looked at my father's face. Red, angry, but also terrified. I looked at my mother, who was now crying, weeping loudly about how ungrateful I was, how they had scrubbed floors for me, how they had sacrificed everything. The conditioning was deep. The guilt was a physical weight. No, I said softly. No police. Not yet. Sarah looked at me, disappointment warring with sympathy in her eyes. Okay, but I'm not leaving until I see you walk back to that bedroom safely. And Zoe, call me the second you can. My father slammed the door in her face. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My mother wiped her eyes instantly, the tears vanishing as if they had never existed. She is toxic, my mother said, trying to drive a wedge between us. You need to cut her off. Zoe, for your own mental health. They took my iPad that night. My father said he was keeping it safe so I wouldn't obsess over emails. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the guest room. I listened to the sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the murmur of the television downstairs. They were watching a sitcom. I could hear the laugh track. They thought they had won. They thought that by taking my phone, my home, and my money, they had taken my power. They thought my memory was a sieve, leaking details under the pressure of trauma and drugs. I reached under the mattress. Earlier, when I had gone to the bathroom, I had stolen a spiral-bound notebook and a ballpoint pen from the desk in the hallway. I opened the notebook to the first blank page. My hand was shaking, but I forced it to be steady. The night before surgery. Time, approximately 8:30 p.m. Location, my kitchen island. Present, Linda Clark, Frank Clark, Zoe Clark, and a notary. Name unknown, male, approximately 50s. Smell of cigarettes. Document, presented as medical billing authorization. Quote from father. We won't let anything happen. I wrote down everything. I wrote down the smell of the tuna casserole. I wrote down the color of the notary's tie. I wrote down the exact wording of the email I had seen. I wrote because my memory was the only asset I had left. They could sell the condo, they could steal the money, but they couldn't sell what was in my head. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then I hid the notebook inside the pillowcase. Beneath my head, I didn't sleep. I lay there, listening to the laugh track from downstairs. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a daughter. I felt like a witness. I waited until the house was quiet. My father was snoring in the recliner downstairs, the rhythmic rasp drifting up through the floorboards, and my mother was in the garden, aggressively deadheading her petunias. I had learned to move silently in the weeks since the revelation. I was a ghost in their house, a tenant in a body that was still knitting itself back together. I found my laptop in the bottom drawer of the china cabinet. Buried under a stack of linen napkins, they had hidden it. But they were not creative hiders. They were arrogant. They assumed I was too drugged or too broken to look. I sat on the floor of the guest room, the laptop burning a warm rectangle onto my thighs, and I typed with ferocious speed. My first email was not to my bank, but to Deborah Vance, the realtor who had sent the congratulations email. I needed the paper trail. Dear Ms. Vance, I am writing to request the full transaction file for the sale of Unit 4B at 1402 River Street. Please include the listing agreement, the sales contract, and most importantly, the power of attorney document used to authorize this sale. I do not have copies for my records. Her reply came within 6 minutes. It was too fast. It was the speed of someone who had been waiting for the other shoe to drop. Hi, Zoe. So good to hear you are recovering. Your parents mentioned you might be reaching out. Attached is the full packet as requested. I just want to say, your parents were absolute saints through this process. They were very clear that you wanted this handled quickly and quietly to relieve your financial burden. We moved mountains to get this closed for you in 5 days. Let me know if you need anything else. The tone was sugary, solicitous, and defensive. They were very clear that you wanted this. She was covering her tracks, planting a narrative in the email chain that I had been a willing participant. I opened the attachment titled executed_POA ... I expected to see the document I thought I remembered. A single page, standard font. Limited to medical billing and condo association matters. That was not what I saw. The document on my screen was 14 pages long. The header read, General Durable Power of Attorney. I scrolled, my eyes scanning the legalese. It was a terrifyingly broad instrument. It granted my parents, Frank and Linda Clark, the authority to access my bank accounts, manage my retirement funds, sell my personal property, and explicitly detailed in Article 7, sell, convey, lease, or encumber real estate. I scrolled to the signature page. There was my signature. It looked shaky, trailing off slightly at the end of the K in Clark, and there was the notary's stamp, Robert J. Miller. I closed my eyes and the memory of that night washed over me, no longer hazy but sharp and cold. I remembered the smell of the kitchen, tuna casserole, and the notary's stale cigarette smoke. I remembered the way the document had been folded. They had only shown me the signature page and the first paragraph, which had indeed mentioned medical billing. The middle 12 pages, the pages that stripped me of my autonomy, had been folded back, hidden under the guise of keeping the papers tidy. I remembered my mother's hand on my shoulder, her thumb digging into the muscle, a touch that felt grounding at the time, but now felt like a pin holding a butterfly in place. I remembered my father standing by the door, arms crossed, not sitting, not relaxing. He had been guarding the exit. It was a setup, a coordinated, choreographed ambush performed by the 2 people who had taught me how to tie my shoes. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my surgery. I saved the document to a hidden folder on my hard drive and then emailed it to a new, secret email address I had created 5 minutes prior. I needed to know where the money went. I logged into my bank account. The interface was cheerful, blue and white, oblivious to the violence it was about to reveal. The transaction history for the week of my surgery was a slaughter. On Tuesday, the day after my surgery, a deposit of $212,400 had hit my checking account. The net proceeds, on Wednesday. There were 2 outgoing wire transfers. Transfer 1, $100,000 to an account ending in 449. Transfer 2, $112,000 to an account ending in 449. The balance in my checking account was $400. They had drained it. They had not even left me enough to pay the first month's rent on an apartment I would now have to find. I heard the back door slide open. My mother was coming inside. I shut the laptop, slid it under the bed, and grabbed a magazine, feigning sleepiness, when she poked her head in, smiling that tight, anxious smile. I looked at her and felt something inside me snap. It was the tether of obligation. It broke clean. "We need to talk," I said. We sat in the living room. My father turned off the television, but kept the remote in his hand, tapping it against his knee. My mother sat on the edge of the sofa, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. "I saw the bank statement," I said. I kept my voice low. I had read somewhere that whispering forces people to lean in, to listen harder. "I know you wired out over $200,000. Where is it?" My father sighed, a long, heavy sound that suggested I was the one being unreasonable. "We told you. Zoe, debts. We paid off debts." "Whose debts?" I asked. "I have no debts. My credit score is 780. I pay my cards in full every month. So whose debts did my house pay for?" "It is a family ledger," my mother said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "You don't understand how much it costs to raise a child. Zoe, do you know how much we spent on your braces? $5,000. Do you remember the car we bought you when you graduated college? That was $10,000. And the times you stayed with us between jobs? The food? The electricity?" "Are you billing me for my childhood?" I asked. I felt a cold numbness spreading through my chest. "Is that what this is? You sold my house to reimburse yourselves for raising me?" "It is not reimbursement," my father snapped, slamming the remote down on the side table. "It is reciprocity. We have rescued you 1,000 times. We have always been there. And now, when we needed help, when the family was in a tight spot, you want to audit us? You want to act like a stranger?" "You stole $200,000, I said. "We borrowed it," my mother cried out. "To save us, to save this house. Would you rather we be on the street? Is that what you want? To see your parents homeless because you are so obsessed with your precious condo?" "You didn't ask," I said. "You drugged me and you stole it." "You signed," my father yelled. He stood up, his face flushing a dark, dangerous red. "You signed that paper. Zoe, you looked me in the eye and you signed it. Don't you dare rewrite history to make yourself the victim. You wanted to help. You said, 'Dad, I don't want you to worry.' That is what you said." "I was talking about the surgery," I said. "I was talking about you worrying about my health." "Semantics," he spat. "You are our daughter. Your assets are family assets. That is how this works. We protect you. You support us. It is a circle." "Where did the money go?" I asked again. "What specifically did you pay off?" "You don't want to know," my mother said darkly. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "Trust me, Zoe, it is better you don't know. Just know that it is gone, and it saved us. And you should be happy you could do that for your family." They were stone walls. They had built a fortress of justification so high they couldn't even see the ground anymore. I went back to the guest room. I didn't cry. I didn't have any tears left. I had tasks. I pulled the laptop out again. I needed to check my mail, not my email. My physical mail. I logged into the United States Postal Service website. I tried to access my dashboard, but my password didn't work. I reset it using my phone number. When I got in, I saw the notification. Change of address confirmation. Effective 3 days before my surgery. All mail addressed to Zoe Clark at River Street was being forwarded to a post office box in a town 20 miles away. They hadn't just forwarded it to their house, they had forwarded it to a blind box, so I wouldn't see the statements coming to them. They had anticipated that I might see an envelope and ask questions. This was premeditated. This was cold. I also checked my homeowners association portal. My login was invalid. I called the management company, putting the phone on speaker but keeping the volume low. "Oh, Ms. Clark," the property manager said, sounding confused. "We removed your access because the account was closed. Your representative sent over the settlement statement last week. We were told you were moving out of the country." "Moving out of the country?" I repeated. "Yes, your mother, Linda. She was very charming. She said you were taking a job in London and needed to sever all ties quickly. She picked up the final statement in person so we wouldn't mail it." I hung up. London. They had invented a new life for me to explain the speed of the sale. I needed to secure my communications. I couldn't trust the mail. And I couldn't trust the Wi-Fi. The next morning, I told my mother I needed to walk to the corner store to get moving again. Doctor's orders. She watched me suspiciously but let me go. I walked 3 blocks to a pack-and-ship store. I rented a private mailbox using my passport, which I had luckily kept in my purse. I paid cash. "I need to reroute all my mail here," I told the clerk. "Immediately." "We can file the form today," he said. "Takes about 48 hours to kick in." "Do it," I said. While I was out, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't have saved, but the area code was local. "Hello? Zoe, is that you?" It was Mrs. Higgins, the elderly woman who lived in Unit 4A right next door to my condo. We had shared a wall and occasional cups of tea for 5 years. "Mrs. Higgins," I said, leaning against the brick wall of the shipping store. "It is me." "Oh, thank goodness," she said. Her voice was tremulous. "I have been so worried. I saw the moving trucks, and your mother said you were too sick to say goodbye. She said you were, well, she implied you were having a breakdown." My hand tightened on the phone. "She said what?" "She said the surgery was for mental health reasons," Mrs. Higgins whispered, clearly scandalous. "And that you needed to be in a facility for a while. So they were selling the place to pay for your care. I wanted to tell you I'm praying for you, dear. And I wanted to say I hope the new owners are nice, though they seem a bit corporate." "Mrs. Higgins," I said, forcing my voice to be steady. "I am not in a facility. I had a hernia repair. I am fine. My parents sold the condo without my permission." There was a long silence on the line. "Oh my," she said finally. "Oh, my dear. That explains it." "Explains what?" "The showings," she said. "They started showing the apartment the morning you went to the hospital. While you were still in surgery, I heard your mother in the hallway. She was telling people, 'The owner is highly motivated. Cash offers only. We need a 10-day close.' She introduced herself as the owner's representative. She was laughing. Zoe. She was joking with the realtor about how much clutter you had." I felt the heat rise in my face. While I was unconscious, while a surgeon was stitching mesh into my abdominal wall, my mother was standing in my living room, laughing about my life, and selling it to the highest bidder. "Who bought it? Mrs. Higgins?" I asked. "Do you know?" "It wasn't a family," she said. "I asked the realtor. She said it was an investment group. Apex Ventures, I think? Or Apex Holdings? They didn't even inspect it. Zoe, they just walked through and made an offer." "Thank you. Mrs. Higgins," I said. "Thank you for telling me. You fight them, dear," she said, her voice suddenly fierce. "You fight them tooth and nail." I walked back to my parents' house with a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Apex Ventures. I looked them up on my phone as I walked. It was a limited liability company registered 3 months ago. The principal address was a shared workspace downtown. A quick search of the county records showed they had bought 6 properties in the last 8 weeks. All distressed sales, all cash. all below market value. This wasn't just a panic sale, this was a liquidation. When I got back to the house, the atmosphere had shifted again. My parents were in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The smell of roast chicken filled the air. A scent that used to mean safety, and now smelled like manipulation. My phone rang. It was my cousin, Mike. "Hey, Zoe," he said. His voice was cautious. "Just checking in. Aunt Linda called Mom." "And?" "She said you are having a hard time," Mike said. "She said you are really lashing out at them. Said the meds are messing with your head, and you are screaming about money and making up stories. Look, I know recovery is tough, but they are just trying to help, right? Maybe cut them some slack?" "They sold my condo, Mike," I said. "They forged my consent and sold my home." "Whoa, okay," Mike said, sounding like he was backing away from a crazy person. "Mom said you might say that. She said you are confused about the paperwork. Look, just get some rest, okay? We love you." He hung up. They were seeding the ground. They were telling everyone I was unstable so that when I finally stood up and pointed a finger at them, no one would look at the evidence. They would only look at the crazy daughter who was off her meds. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. I spent the next 2 days acting the part. I apologized. I told them I was just stressed. I let my mother hug me. I let my father lecture me about financial responsibility. I ate their food. I played the role of the chastened child. And while I played, I recorded. I used the voice memo app on my phone, in our state. Only one party needed to consent to a recording, and that party was me. I kept my phone in my pocket, the microphone facing out. I needed them to admit it. I needed them to say the words. It happened on a Thursday night. We were drinking tea in the living room. I had steered the conversation toward the family friend who had helped them with the notary. "It was just so lucky he was available so late," I said, keeping my voice dreamy and vague. "I feel bad we rushed him. He owed me a favor," my father grunted, watching the news. "I just wish we could have waited a week," I said. "I would have been clearer. We could have gotten a better price." "We couldn't wait," my mother said. She was knitting, the needles clicking rhythmically. "You know that." "I don't know that," I said gently. "Why couldn't we wait? The market wasn't crashing that fast." "It wasn't the market," my mother said. Dropping a stitch, she sighed, a burst of frustration escaping her. "It was the deadline. They were going to call the loan. Zoe, on the 1st of the month, if we didn't have the cash by Friday, everything would have collapsed. We would have lost the duplex, the car, everything." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What loan? Mom?" "The bridge loan," she murmured, almost to herself. "For the project. We couldn't wait. Time was running out. We had to move the money before the first." "So the condo money paid off the bridge loan?" I asked, pushing just a little harder. "It saved us," she said, looking up at me, her eyes wet and sincere. "It stopped the bleeding. You have to understand. We didn't have a choice." "I understand," I said. I reached into my pocket and stopped the recording. Time was running out. They were going to call the loan. It wasn't about protecting me. It wasn't about my medical bills. It was about a deadline for a debt I didn't create, for a project I didn't know existed. They had liquidated my life to meet a margin call on their own bad decisions. I went upstairs and backed up the recording to the cloud. Then I emailed it to my lawyer. A lawyer I hadn't hired yet, but whose name I had found on a forum for victims of elder abuse and financial fraud. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the notebook where I had written down the details of the signing. I added a new entry. Date: February 12th. Event: Confession. Speaker: Linda Clark. Admission. Time was running out. We had to move the money before the first. I closed the notebook. I was done crying. I was done asking. I was done being the daughter. Tomorrow, I would leave this house. I would find a cheap motel. I would hire that lawyer. And I would begin the slow, brutal process of taking back my life. But first, I needed to find out what project was worth destroying their only child for. I needed to find out who held the loan that had cost me my home. I had a feeling the rabbit hole went deeper than just my parents' incompetence. The bridge loan, the family friend, the LLC that bought my condo without an inspection. It all felt connected. It felt like a system. And I was going to dismantle it, brick by brick. I sat in the office of Elena Rossi, a lawyer I had found through a legal aid clinic because my bank account was currently overdrawn by $40. Her office was in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a vape shop, and the carpet smelled faintly of stale coffee and toner. I had expected righteous indignation. I had expected her to look at the power of attorney document, slam her hand on the desk, and declare it a forgery, a crime, a slam-dunk case of grand larceny. Instead, she was looking at the scanned PDF with the weary expression of a mechanic looking at a transmission that had been driven without oil for 5,000 miles. "It is tight," she said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the screen. "Legally, the document is sound. It is a general durable power of attorney. It explicitly grants the agent, your parents, the power to sell real estate. It was notarized. You signed it." "I was under duress," I said, gripping the arms of the cheap visitor chair. I was terrified. I was having surgery the next morning. They cornered me. "Duress is hard to prove," Elena said, taking off her reading glasses, "unless they held a gun to your head or physically forced your hand. The law tends to view family pressure as family dynamics, unpleasant, but not illegal, and since the signing happened the night before the surgery, you cannot claim medical incapacity from the anesthesia. You were lucid, stressed, yes, but legally competent." "So they just get to keep it?" I asked, my voice rising. "They get to keep the $400,000 they stole from me?" "We can argue undue influence," Elena said. "We can argue that they misrepresented the scope of the document. You said they told you it was for medical billing. If we can prove they lied about the document's content to induce you to sign, that is fraud in the inducement. But Zoe, that is a hill to climb. It becomes he said, she said. And judges hate ruling against parents who claim they were just trying to help a sick child." She leaned forward, her expression softening for the first time. "I have seen this before. It is usually an elderly parent being fleeced by a child, but it works both ways. Tell me something. When did your parents start treating your boundaries like insults?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to say, "last week," but the words died in my throat. I thought about the time I was 22 and my mother opened my bank statements because she worried about my spending. I thought about the time I was 26 and my father demanded a spare key to my apartment in case of fire, then used it to let himself in and rearrange my furniture while I was at work. I thought about the constant, low-level hum of guilt they generated whenever I said no to a Sunday dinner or a request for $50. "Always," I whispered. "They have always done it." "Then this isn't a robbery," Elena said grimly. "It is an escalation. And if we are going to fight it, we need more than just your word. We need a pattern. We need to prove they acted in bad faith. We need to find out where the money went, and we need to prove it didn't benefit you." I left her office with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes. Matching the ache in my healing abdomen, I had a to-do list. The first step was the hospital. I requested my full medical chart, specifically the anesthesia logs and the nursing notes from the pre-op holding area. I wanted to see if I had mentioned the stress, if my blood pressure had been elevated, if there was any objective proof that I was not in a state to make financial decisions. The records came 3 days later. They were dry, clinical, and useless. Patient alert and oriented ×3. Vital signs stable. The only hint was a nursing note from the recovery room. Patient mother at bedside. Patient appears agitated when mother handles phone. Administered 2 milligrams hydromorphone for pain/anxiety. It wasn't enough. While I was digging through the past, my parents were trying to bury the present in flowers. I was staying at a budget motel on the edge of town, paying weekly rates with a credit card I prayed wouldn't decline. I hadn't told them where I was, but they knew I had left. The love bombing began digitally. My phone pinged constantly. Zoe, honey, we made lasagna. Please come home. We are so worried about your incision. Zoe, found this photo of you at the beach when you were 6. You were such a happy baby. We just want that happiness for you again. We are sorry if we overstepped. We really are. But you scared us. Zoe, you were so sick, and we just panicked. We made a decision to save the family, and we thought you would understand because you have such a big heart. Please don't shut us out. It breaks your mother's heart. It was masterful. Every apology contained a hook. We are sorry, but you scared us. We are sorry, but we were saving the family. It shifted the axis of the conflict. Suddenly, I wasn't the victim of theft. I was the ungrateful daughter punishing her terrified parents for a mistake born of love. If I hadn't seen the bank transfers, it might have worked, but I had seen the numbers. $100,000. $112,000. I needed to know where those wires went. I went back to the recording I had made. The bridge loan. Time was running out. The community center. I started searching for community center renovation and bridge loan in local news archives. It didn't take long. There was a splashy article from 6 months ago in the local Gazette. Revitalization project stalls due to funding gaps. The article detailed a plan to renovate an old textile mill into a community arts and youth center. The project was spearheaded by a nonprofit called the Heritage Initiative. The director of the Heritage Initiative was a man named Marcus Thorne. I knew Marcus Thorne. He was Uncle Marcus to me growing up. Though we weren't related, he was a charismatic man, a fixture at my parents' church, the kind of guy who wore 3-piece suits to barbecues and always had a business card ready. My father idolized him. My father had always wanted to be a big man in town, and Marcus treated him like one. I dug deeper. I pulled the public filings for the Heritage Initiative. It was a 501c3, but its financial disclosures were a mess. And then, in a footnote of a county board meeting minute, I found it. A list of private guarantors for a high-interest, short-term construction loan. Frank Clark. My father hadn't just donated money. He had co-signed a private money loan. A hard money loan. The kind of loan that comes with exorbitant interest rates and aggressive collection tactics. The loan had gone into default 45 days ago. The lender had likely threatened to sue, to garnish wages, to take their duplex. They were facing total financial ruin. And there I was, lying on a hospital gurney, with $400,000 of equity sitting in a condo I couldn't defend. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a piggy bank. I needed to see it. I needed to see the lie in the flesh. The Heritage Initiative was hosting a gala for the future that Friday night at the very textile mill they were renovating. Tickets were $200 a plate, which I obviously couldn't afford, but I knew the caterer. I had worked events with them in college. I called a favor. I showed up at 4 p.m, wearing black slacks and a white button-down, and spent 2 hours folding napkins and arranging silverware. When the guests started arriving, I slipped into the shadows of the mezzanine, overlooking the main floor. The room was draped in velvet and lit by Edison bulbs, designed to look rustic and expensive. Local politicians were there, business owners, and there, near the front of the room, were my parents. My father was wearing his tuxedo, the one he hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding. My mother was in a sequined navy gown I had never seen before, probably bought with my money. They looked radiant. They looked relieved. They were shaking hands, laughing, accepting pats on the back. Marcus Thorne took the stage. He was a handsome man with silver hair and a voice like melted butter. "Tonight," he boomed into the microphone, "we celebrate the heroes who made this dream possible. When we hit a wall, when the funding dried up and the skeptics said we should quit, these people stepped up. They dug deep. They sacrificed because they believe in our children." The crowd applauded. "I want to recognize our platinum donors," Marcus said. He gestured to a large brass plaque veiled in red velvet. With a flourish, he pulled the cord. The velvet fell away. The names were engraved in bold, black letters. Third on the list was Apex Ventures, LLC. Fourth on the list was Frank and Linda Clark. I stared at the plaque from my hiding spot, my hands gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. Apex Ventures, the LLC that had bought my condo. It was a circle, a dirty, incestuous circle. My parents had sold my condo to Apex Ventures at a fire sale price. Apex Ventures had likely been recruited by Marcus Thorne, real estate sharks he knew. The money from the sale had gone to pay off the defaulted loan my father signed, and the profit, or the sweetener for the deal, had been routed back into the project as a donation from Apex and my parents to buy them status. They had washed my life through a nonprofit and come out looking like saints. I watched my father step forward to shake Marcus Thorne's hand. The crowd cheered. My mother wiped a tear from her eye. They were basking in the applause of a room full of strangers, bought with the destruction of their daughter's security. I felt a coldness settle over me that was permanent. This wasn't desperation. This was vanity. They didn't sell my house just to survive. They sold it to avoid the shame of admitting they had failed. They sold it to keep their standing in this room. I slipped out the back exit before the speeches ended. I couldn't breathe the same air as them. I went back to the motel and did the only thing that felt safe. I opened the small, battered cardboard box I had managed to smuggle out of their house in my duffel bag. It contained the few things that were truly mine: my birth certificate, my passport, and a stack of letters from my grandmother, Rose. Grandma Rose had died 4 years ago. She was my father's mother, but she had been nothing like him. She was sharp, unsentimental, and fiercely independent. She had always looked at my father with a mixture of love and disappointment, as if she knew he was a balloon waiting to pop. I sifted through the letters. Looking for comfort, I read her handwriting, spidery and blue. Dear Zoe, don't let them tell you who to be. Dear Zoe, save your money. Independence is expensive. And then, at the bottom of the stack, I found an envelope I didn't remember opening. It was sealed with a piece of clear tape that had yellowed with age. It was dated 2 weeks before she died. I tore it open. My dearest Zoe, if you are reading this, I am gone, and something has likely gone wrong. I love my son, but I know him. He is a man who believes the world owes him a living, and he will drag anyone nearby down with him when he sinks. He does not mean to be cruel, which makes him dangerous. I have left a small instruction. If anything ever happens, if you ever feel cornered, or if you find yourself with nothing because of them, speak to the attorney I used for my final papers, Mr. Arthur Henderson. He will explain why I did it this way. I did not put this in the main will because your father would have found a way to break it. Keep your chin up. You are the strong one. Love, Grandma. I stared at the letter. The date was 4 years old. Arthur Henderson. I grabbed my laptop. I searched for Arthur Henderson attorney. The first result was an obituary. Arthur Henderson had passed away 2 years ago. Panic flared in my chest. I had a key to a door that no longer existed. I searched for his law firm, Henderson and Associates. It was listed as permanently closed. I felt like crying. I felt like the universe was dangling a rope in front of me and then snatching it away. But I forced myself to keep clicking. I found a press release from 3 years ago. Henderson and Associates acquired by Sterling. Holt and Wise, a successor firm. The next morning, I put on my only suit, the one I had worn to the gala, now cleaned and pressed, and drove to the offices of Sterling, Holt, and Wise. It was in a glass tower in the financial district, a world away from Elena Rossi's strip mall office. The receptionist looked at me with skepticism. I didn't look like their usual clientele. I looked like a woman living in a motel. I am here about a file from a wildly acquired firm, I said, trying to project authority. The estate of Rose Clark. Arthur Henderson was the attorney. Do you have an appointment? She asked, her nose wrinkling slightly. No, I said, but I have a letter. I waited for 2 hours. Finally, a junior associate came out. He looked barely older than me, wearing a suit that cost more than my stolen condo. Ms. Clark, he said. I am James. I pulled the archive files. It took some digging. Henderson's filing system was archaic. He led me into a small conference room. On the table was a thick, dusty folder. So, James said, opening the file, it appears Mr. Henderson was the trustee for a separate entity created by your grandmother, the Rose Clark Testamentary Trust. I never heard of it, I said. My parents handled her estate. They said there was just the life insurance and the house, which they sold. That was the probate estate, James corrected. This is a separate trust, inter vivos, created while she was alive, funded quietly. It sits outside of probate. Your parents wouldn't have known it existed unless Mr. Henderson told them, and his notes here say, well, they are quite specific. He turned a page and pointed to a handwritten note in the margin. Instructions. Do not notify Frank Clark. Beneficiary is Zoe Clark solely. Trigger event. Zoe turns 33 or proves financial distress caused by family coercion. I am 32, I said. Yes, James said. But the clause regarding financial distress, it is unusual phrasing, harm by coercion or fraud. Usually, trusts just have an age limit. What is in the trust? I asked. I was expecting maybe a few $1,000s, a savings bond, something to help with the lawyer fees. James turned to the asset schedule. It holds a single asset, a residential property. He slid a photo across the table. It was a picture of a small, white bungalow with a green roof. It wasn't a mansion. It was a simple, sturdy 2-bedroom house in a town about 30 minutes north. It was purchased 7 years ago, James said. It has been rented out by a property management company since then. The rent has been accumulating in the trust account to pay for maintenance and taxes. The house is free and clear. No mortgage. I stared at the photo. The house was boring. It was modest. It was beautiful. She bought a house, I whispered, and she hid it. The file says she wanted you to have a safe harbor, James said, reading from the document. She anticipated that your inheritance from her estate might be compromised, so she created a backup. Compromised. That was a polite word for consumed by Frank and Linda. So, it is mine? I asked. Technically, the trustee, which is now our firm, holds the title until you turn 33, James said. Unless you can prove the hardship clause, you would need to show evidence that you have suffered financial harm due to family coercion. I laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. I reached into my bag and pulled out the flash drive containing the recordings, the bank statements, the sham power of attorney, and the photo of the plaque at the gala. I can prove it, I said. I can prove it today. James looked at the flash drive, then at me. If you can substantiate that, we can petition for early release of the assets. You could have title to the house and the accumulated rental income, about $40,000, within 30 days. I walked out of the glass tower into the bright sunlight of the city. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I wasn't shaking because of the money. I wasn't shaking because I had a house. I was shaking because, for the first time in my life, I realized I hadn't been invisible. My grandmother had seen me, years ago, while I was busy trying to please my parents, trying to be the good daughter. Grandma Rose had watched them. She had seen the way they devoured my time and my energy. She had known, with chilling accuracy, that one day they would come for my life, and she had built me a lifeboat. She hadn't just left me money. She had left me a weapon. I stood on the sidewalk and pulled out my phone. My mother was calling, again. The photo on the screen was of the two of us, taken years ago, smiling. I didn't answer. I didn't decline it. I just watched it ring until it went to voicemail. I wasn't going to argue with them anymore. I wasn't going to beg for explanations. I had a lawyer. I had a house they didn't know about, and I had the truth. I hailed a cab. Take me to 1405 Maple Street, I told the driver. The address of the bungalow. I needed to see it. I needed to stand on the porch of the house that Spite built. and I needed to plan how I was going to use it to bring the whole corrupt edifice of my parents' lies crashing down. Because Grandma Rose was right. My father was dangerous because he was weak. But I was about to show them what it looked like to be dangerous because you were strong. I watched the city blur past the window. The anger in my chest had changed. It wasn't hot and chaotic anymore. It was cold. It was structured. It was a plan. They had sold my past. Fine. I would use the future my grandmother gave me to bankrupt theirs. The house on Maple Street was boring. That was the most beautiful thing about it. I parked my rental car 3 houses down and just stared at it through the windshield, the wipers slapping back and forth against a steady gray drizzle. It was a single-story bungalow with beige siding and a roof that looked like it had been replaced within the last 5 years. There was a tricycle in the driveway and a potted fern on the porch. It was not a luxury condo with quartz countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a structure built for shelter, not status. My grandmother, Rose, had bought it 7 years ago. She had put 20% down, paid the mortgage off with aggressive speed using dividends I didn't know she had, and placed it into a trust that was invisible to everyone, especially her son. I looked at the file James, the young lawyer, had given me. The tenant was a schoolteacher named Mrs. Gable who had lived there for 4 years. She paid her rent on the first of the month. She never complained. The rent checks went into an escrow account that had been quietly compounding interest. It was real. It was tangible. And my parents couldn't touch it. For the first time since waking up from surgery, the tight band of panic around my chest loosened. I owned this. Well, the trust owned it. But I was the trust. The clause James had found, financial harm by coercion or fraud, was the key. My parents' theft of my condo was the exact trigger event my grandmother had written into the bylaws. Their greed was the key that unlocked my safety net. I drove back to the motel, the knowledge sitting in my chest like a warm stone. I decided right then that I would not tell them. I wouldn't scream it in their faces during an argument. I wouldn't use it as leverage. I would hoard this secret. They had taken my home because they knew where it was. They couldn't steal what they couldn't see. I called Sarah from the motel room. She picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you are safe," she said. "I am better than safe," I said, watching the neon sign of the motel flicker outside my window. "I have an exit strategy." I told her about the house. I told her about the trust. I heard her exhale. A long, shaky sound. "Zoe," she said, that is incredible. Your grandmother was a genius." "She was a survivor," I said. "She knew them. She knew exactly what they would do." "So what now?" Sarah asked. "Do you move in?" "No," I said. "Mrs. Gable lives there. I am not kicking out a teacher. I don't need the house to live in yet. I just need to know it is there. It changes the math. Sarah, I don't have to settle with them because I am desperate. I can fight them because I am secure." But my parents sensed the shift. They didn't know about the house. But they knew I had stopped answering their texts. They knew I had hired a lawyer, even if I hadn't formally served them yet. Silence, to them, was an act of aggression. The escalation began on a Wednesday. I was sitting in the motel room, organizing my bank statements into a timeline, when my phone rang. It was Dr. Evans' office, my surgeon. "Ms. Clark?" It was the nurse, a woman whose voice I associated with changing dressings and gentle instructions. "Doctor, Evans asked me to call. He received a message from your mother this morning that was concerning—" My stomach dropped. "What did she say?" "She called the emergency line," the nurse said, her voice careful, professional, but laced with a subtle wariness. "She stated that you were exhibiting signs of extreme confusion and paranoia. She claimed you were off your pain management regimen and that you had fled your home in a state of crisis. She wanted us to know that you might be a danger to yourself due to post-operative delirium." I closed my eyes. It was a masterstroke. If I sued them, they would pull my medical records. If there was a note in my file from my surgeon saying I was mentally unstable, their lawyer would use it to invalidate everything. They would say I didn't remember the signing correctly because I was delirious. They would say my accusations were hallucinations. I am not confused, I said, forcing my voice to be lower, slower, more grounded than I felt. I am staying at a hotel because my parents sold my apartment without my consent while I was in surgery. The conflict is financial, not medical. I am taking Tylenol for the pain. I am changing my dressings daily. I have no fever. I am lucid. There was a pause on the line. The nurse was weighing my calm voice against my mother's frantic, tearful performance. "Okay," she said finally. "I have to document the call. Ms. Clark, it is protocol, but I will also document your response. You sound very together." "I am," I said. "Please note in the chart that my mother is not an authorized contact. I am revoking any permission for her to speak to my medical team. If she calls again, please direct her to my attorney." "Understood," she said. I hung up and threw the phone onto the bed. I felt a surge of rage so pure it made my hands shake. They weren't just stealing my money anymore. They were attacking my mind. They were trying to break my credibility so that when I finally spoke the truth, no one would believe me. It was time to stop playing defense. I called Elena Rossi, the lawyer I had first consulted. I had scraped together the retainer using the last of my savings and a credit card cash advance. "Send the letter," I said. "Are you sure?" Elena asked. "Once we send a formal demand, the bridge is burned. There is no going back to Sunday dinners." "They burned the bridge when they sold the ground under my feet," I said. "Send it. I want a full accounting. I want the wire confirmations. I want the closing statement. And I want to know exactly where the proceeds went." The letter went out via certified mail the next day. The response came 48 hours later. It didn't come from my parents. It came from a law firm downtown. Expensive, aggressive, the kind of firm that specialized in bullying people into silence. The letter was a masterpiece of gaslighting. "Dear Ms. Rossi, we represent Frank and Linda Clark. We are in receipt of your letter regarding the sale of the property at 1402 River Street. Your client's allegations of theft and conversion are categorically denied and border on defamation. Mr. and Mrs. Clark acted as faithful agents under a valid, durable power of attorney, executed by your client while she was fully competent. The sale was conducted to satisfy urgent financial obligations that your client was aware of and had previously agreed to assist with. The proceeds were used to settle family debts, as was the verbal understanding between the parties. Your client's current hostile behavior is a source of great distress to her parents, who have only ever sought to protect her. We suggest you counsel your client to cease this harassment immediately. Any further accusations will be met with a countersuit for emotional distress and legal fees." "Harassment," I read aloud in Elena's office. "They steal $400,000 and call it harassment when I ask where it went." "They are posturing," Elena said, though she looked tired. "They are betting you don't have the stomach for a fight. They are betting you will look at the legal fees and the emotional toll and walk away. They claim there was a verbal understanding. That is their defense. They will say you told them to do it, and the power of attorney was just the mechanism." "It is a lie," I said. "I know it is a lie," Elena said, "but in court, it is your word against theirs, unless we can invalidate the document." I went back to the motel and opened the laptop. I pulled up the scanned copy of the power of attorney again. I had looked at it 100 times, but this time, I looked with the eyes of a detective. Not a victim. I zoomed in on the notary stamp. Robert J. Miller. I zoomed in on the date and time written next to the signature. February 11th, 8:45 p.m. I frowned. February 11th was the night before my surgery. I remembered the night clearly. I remembered the tuna casserole. I remembered the notary smelling like smoke. But 8:45 p.m.? I opened my phone and scrolled back through my texts. I found the thread with my mother. On February 11th, at 8:52 p.m., my mother had sent me a text. "On our way. Traffic is bad. Be there in 10. I stared at the timestamp. 8:52 p.m. If they were on their way at 8:52 p.m., They couldn't have been in my kitchen at 8:45 p.m. watching me sign a document. I went to my photo album. I had taken a picture of my packed bag that night to send to Sarah. "Ready for the knife," the caption said. The photo metadata showed it was taken at 9:15 p.m. In the background of the photo, the kitchen island was empty. No casserole, no folders. They hadn't arrived until after 9:15. The notary had backdated the time, or more likely, the notary hadn't been there at all when I signed. I closed my eyes and replayed the scene. The man, the smoky smell. He had been there, but when? I realized then that the man I remembered wasn't stamping anything. He had just been standing there. He had handed me the pen. He had watched me sign, but I didn't remember him writing in his logbook. I didn't remember him stamping the paper. He had taken the document away. He must have stamped it later. And if he stamped it later, outside of my presence, that was a violation of the notary statutes. And if the time in his logbook didn't match the reality of when we were in the room. His log was fraudulent. I had a crack in the foundation. But before I could run with it, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Zoe?" The voice was tentative, soft. It sounded like my mother, but without the edge of hysteria. "Aunt Clara?" I asked. Clara was my mother's younger sister. She was the quiet one, the one who always sat at the end of the table during holidays, nodding and smiling while my parents held court. We had never been close, mostly because my mother dominated every interaction. "I need to see you," Clara said. "I know you are not telling people where you are, but I am at the diner on 4th Street, the one with the pie. Please, Zoe, I think I can help." I hesitated. Was this another trap? Was she sent by them to find out where I was living? "I will be there in 10 minutes, I said. "But if I see their car, I am leaving." "They don't know I'm calling you," she said. "They would kill me if they knew." I met her in a booth at the back. Clara looked older than I remembered. She was stirring a cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly. When she saw me, her face crumpled with a mixture of relief and shame. "You look thin," she said. "I had surgery," I said, sitting down. "And I am living on vending machine crackers. What do you want, Clara?" "I heard what they did," she said, lowering her voice. "Frank called me. He was ranting about you, said you were ungrateful, said you were trying to ruin his reputation." "He ruined his own reputation," I said. "Zoe," she said, reaching across the table but stopping short of touching my hand. "They did it to me, too." I stared at her. "What?" 10 years ago, she said. "When Mom, your grandmother, was sick, I was living with her, taking care of her, Frank and Linda. They told me they needed to borrow some money against Mom's house to pay for a specialist. They had me sign some papers. They said it was for her care." She took a sip of tea, her eyes watery. "It wasn't for her care. They used it to buy into a franchise, a smoothie place. Remember that?" "I remember," I said. "It closed in 6 months. They lost the money," Clara said. "Mom never knew. I paid off that loan for 5 years. Zoe, every month. I didn't tell Mom because I didn't want to break her heart. I didn't tell you because I was ashamed that I let them trick me." "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because I heard about the condo," she said. "And I realized they haven't stopped. I thought when Mom died, they would stop. But they just found a new target." She opened her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked old, creased and soft at the edges. "There was a meeting," she said. 3 years before Mom died. You were in college. Frank and Linda came to Mom asking for money for another project, some house flipping scheme. Mom said no. She said it loudly. Clara smoothed the paper on the table. It was a page from a calendar. My grandmother's handwriting. August 4th. Frank and Linda asked for $50,000. Told them no. Told them they are holes in a bucket. Told them to leave Zoe alone. "She said that?" I whispered. "Leave Zoe alone?" "She knew," Clara said. She stood right there in the kitchen and pointed her cane at Frank. She said, "You have drained me dry, but you will not touch that girl. She is the only one of us who knows how to work." Frank was furious. He screamed that you owed them. He said, "We made her. We own her." The air in the diner felt suddenly cold. We made her. We own her. That was it. That was the core of it. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an asset, a subsidiary company they had founded and could liquidate at will. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "We were scared," Clara said simply. "Frank can be overwhelming, and Linda, she twists things until you don't know what is true anymore. We tried to keep the peace." "There is no peace," I said. "There is only them taking everything." "I am willing to testify," Clara said. I looked at her, this mousy, quiet woman who had spent her life in the background. "You would do that?" I asked. "It would destroy your relationship with them." "I don't have a relationship with them," she said. "I have a hostage situation. I'm tired of being a hostage, Zoe, and I'm tired of watching them eat their young." I took the calendar page. "Thank you, Aunt Clara." "Don't thank me," she said. "Just win." I drove back to the motel with the calendar page on the passenger seat. The puzzle was coming together, the notary log, the timestamp discrepancy, the history of financial abuse, the witness, but I knew it wasn't enough to just have the pieces. I needed to assemble them into a weapon that wouldn't misfire. My parents were expecting me to explode. They were poking me with gaslighting, with legal threats, with public shaming, waiting for me to scream, to make a scene, to look like the unstable daughter they claimed I was. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I sat at the small desk in the motel room and opened a fresh document on my laptop. I typed the header, "Timeline of events." I started entering data points. Cold, hard facts. Date, February 11th. Time, 8:52 p.m. Text from Linda Clark confirming arrival time. Document timestamp, 8:45 p.m. Evidence of fraud. Date, February 12th. Surgery. Date, February 13th. Wire transfer of $212,000. Date, February 14th. Transfer of funds to Apex Ventures. I built the narrative brick by brick. No emotion, no adjectives, just the brutal arithmetic of betrayal. When I was finished, it was 3 a.m. I was exhausted. But my mind was clear. I turned off the laptop and lay down on the lumpy mattress. I pulled out my phone and went to my saved voicemails. I scrolled down to the bottom. January 2022. I pressed play. "Hi, Zozo," the voice crackled. It was raspy, breathless, but undeniably her. "It is Grandma. Just checking in. I saw a bird today that reminded me of you. A little sparrow, fighting a crow for a piece of bread. The sparrow won. You are a fighter. Honey, don't let the crows get you. Call me back when you are off work. Love you." I let the message play again, and again. Don't let the crows get you. I cried then. Not the sobbing, hysterical tears of the first week. These were quiet tears. I was mourning. I was mourning the parents I had wanted. I was mourning the idea that if I just achieved enough, if I was just good enough, they would finally be proud of me instead of envious. I was mourning the fantasy of a family that would protect me. That family didn't exist, but I existed, and Grandma Rose existed in the house she had left me, and Aunt Clara existed in her quiet bravery. I wasn't alone. I was just trimming the dead branches from my family tree. I wiped my face and sat up. I was done mourning. Tomorrow, I would call Elena. We would draft the complaint. We wouldn't just ask for the money back. We would go for the throat. We would file for fraud, for conversion, for breach of fiduciary duty, and we would name the notary, and we would name Apex Ventures. I would burn their reputation to the ground, not with fire, but with paper. I fell asleep to the sound of the rain, and for the first time in weeks. I didn't dream about the surgery. I dreamed about a sparrow, small and brown, standing over a defeated crow, holding a piece of bread that no one could take away. The legal system does not move like it does in the movies. There is no sudden music swell, no dramatic slamming of a gavel, no breathless rush to the courthouse steps. It is a slow, grinding machinery of paper and patience. We filed a civil complaint in the Superior Court 3 weeks after I found the house on Maple Street. The causes of action were dry and technical: conversion of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud in the inducement, and unjust enrichment. We named my parents, Frank and Linda Clark, as the primary defendants. We also named the notary, Robert J. Miller, and, as a necessary party to quiet title, Apex Ventures, LLC. I hit submit on an electronic portal while sitting in Elena's office. It was anticlimactic: a little spinning wheel on the screen, a confirmation number, and a filing fee of $250 charged to my credit card. "Now we wait," Elena said, closing the browser tab. "They have 30 days to answer, but in the meantime, we start discovery. We ask for everything." Discovery is a polite word for an autopsy. We were dissecting the corpse of my family life to find the cause of death. We subpoenaed the title company first. Title companies are usually risk-averse. They exist to ensure that property transfers are clean, boring, and final. But when we received the closing binder for my condo, it was anything but clean. I sat in the motel room with a highlighter, going through the 300 pages of PDFs Elena had forwarded to me. I read every line. I read the tax prorations. I read the water bill payoffs. And then I found Addendum B. It was a single page, tucked between the deed and the bill of sale. It was a disbursement instruction. Usually, when you sell a house, the proceeds go to the seller. If the seller is not present, they go to the seller's verified bank account. Addendum B read, "Seller hereby directs escrow agent to wire net proceeds of $212,400 to the following account." The account name listed was not Zoe Clark. It was not even Frank and Linda Clark. It was Clark Family Management. Below the account details was a signature line. My signature was there, but it looked different than the one on the power of attorney. It was smoother, less shaky, and next to it was a handwritten note, initialed by the escrow officer, per POA direction via phone call with Linda Clark. I called Elena immediately. "They wired the money to a business account," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't have a business account called Clark Family Management." "That is a massive liability for the title company," Elena said, her voice sharp with interest. "A title officer should never wire funds to a third-party entity based on a phone call, even with a power of attorney. It screams money laundering. If they did that, they were either grossly negligent or they were told to look the other way." "Who told them?" I asked. "Look at the realtor," Elena said. "The realtor drives the bus." I went back to the file, Deborah Vance, the woman who had sent me the congratulations email. I started digging into Deborah Vance. I looked at her social media, her past sales, her LinkedIn. She was a high-volume agent, the kind who won awards for most units moved. I scrolled back through her Facebook photos. 2 years ago, a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new park. Deborah Vance was standing in the front row, holding a giant pair of scissors. Standing next to her, with his hand familiarly on her shoulder, was Marcus Thorne, the director of the Heritage Initiative, the man my father had bankrupted us to impress. My stomach turned over. This wasn't just my parents making a panic decision. This was a network. Marcus Thorne needed his bridge loan paid off. He had a realtor, Deborah Vance, who could facilitate a quick sale. He had an investor, Apex Ventures, ready to buy. And he had a patsy, my father, who was desperate for approval and willing to sacrifice his daughter to get it. My parents weren't the masterminds. They were the tools. A week later, the response to our lawsuit arrived. It wasn't a legal filing. It was a settlement offer. My parents had hired a new lawyer, a man named Sterling who had a reputation for being a fixer. The email from his office was dripping with condescension. Subject: Settlement Proposal. Clark versus Clark Ms. Rossi. Our clients: Frank and Linda Clark. are heartbroken by this misunderstanding. They maintain that they acted in their daughter's best interest during a medical crisis. However, to avoid the public spectacle of litigation and to preserve family unity, they are willing to offer the following compromise. 1. Frank and Linda Clark will repay the sum of $50,000 to Zoe Clark, payable in monthly installments of $200 over a period of 20 years. 2. Zoe Clark will drop all lawsuits with prejudice. 3. Zoe Clark will sign a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. 4. Zoe Clark will issue a joint public statement with her parents, to be posted on all social media channels, thanking them for their assistance during her recovery and clarifying that the sale of the condo was a mutual decision. I stared at the screen. I did not feel angry. Anger implies surprise. I felt a cold, deep disgust. They wanted me to lie. They wanted me to take $50,000, a fraction of what they stole, paid out over 20 years, which meant I would be tethered to them for decades. Waiting for a monthly check like an allowance, and in exchange, I had to tell the world they were heroes. They are terrified, Elena said when we met to discuss it. This isn't a serious offer. This is a panic move. They want the non-disparagement agreement. They need you to shut up because if this gets out, your father's reputation in town is finished, and Marcus Thorne's reputation gets mud on it too. Refuse it, I said. Don't just refuse it. Tell them the number is $425,000, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages, and I will never sign an NDA. I will write a book about it if I want to. That will escalate things, Elena warned. When narcissists lose control of the narrative, they get dangerous. Let them, I said. I am done protecting them. The escalation happened on a Tuesday night. I was at the motel, eating a sandwich and watching a documentary on my laptop. I had been careful. I parked my rental car around the back. I used a P.O. box. But my father was a retired insurance adjuster. He knew how to find people. There was a knock at the door. Not the housekeeping knock, a heavy, rhythmic pounding. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Frank. He was wearing a windbreaker and a baseball cap. He looked older. His face was gray, the skin sagging around his jaw. He was holding a plastic grocery bag. "Zoe?" he called out. His voice was muffled by the cheap wood. "Zoe, I know you're in there. I saw the car." I stepped back. I checked the deadbolt. I checked the chain. "Go away," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Open the door, honey," he said. He sounded pathetic. He sounded broken. "I brought you some fruit. Mom said you are probably not eating right. We just want to talk. No lawyers, just us." "I am not opening the door," I said. "Leave the fruit. Leave the premises. If you don't leave, I am calling the police." "Don't do that," he pleaded. I could hear the tears in his voice. "Zoe, please, we are your parents. We changed your diapers. We sat up with you when you had the chicken pox. How can you treat us like criminals? We made a mistake. We were scared. We can fix this if you just let me in." It was the weaponized nostalgia again. We changed your diapers. As if biology was a lifetime contract for abuse. "You stole my home," I said through the door. "That is not a mistake. That is a crime." There was a silence, a long, heavy silence where the weeping stopped. When he spoke again, the voice was different. It was the voice I remembered from when I was 16 and had missed curfew. It was cold. It was hard. It was the voice of a man who felt entitled to obedience. "You ungrateful little bitch," he said. The words hung in the air, vibrating through the door. "You think you are so smart," he hissed. "You think you can embarrass us? After everything we did for you? You are nothing without us. You would be living in a gutter if we hadn't pushed you. Open the damn door." He kicked the door. The frame shuddered. I didn't flinch. I dialed 911. "I have an intruder attempting to break into my room at the Starlight Motel," I said clearly. "He is becoming violent." "I am leaving," my father shouted. "But you mark my words. Zoe, you are going to regret this. You are going to die alone because you pushed away the only people who ever loved you." I heard his footsteps retreat. I heard a car engine start. I sank down onto the floor, my back against the door. I didn't cry. I felt a strange sense of relief. He had shown me his true face. The crying was a performance. The fruit was a prop. The rage was the reality. He didn't love me. He loved owning me, and when he couldn't own me, he wanted to break me. The next day, the subpoenas for the bank records came back. We had subpoenaed the account for Clark Family Management, the account the title company had wired the money to. I sat in Elena's conference room. Looking at the spreadsheet, it was a map of their desperation. The wire came in on February 13th, $212,000. On February 14th, the money started moving. $50,000 went to the bridge loan servicer to bring the account current. $20,000 went to a credit card company. $10,000 went to a contractor for materials. But the biggest chunk, $100,000, went to a company called Orion Consulting Group. "Who is Orion Consulting?" Elena asked. I searched the Secretary of State database. Orion Consulting Group was a limited liability company formed 6 months ago. The registered agent was a lawyer I didn't know. But the principal office address. I typed the address into Google Maps. 100 Main Street, Suite 400. I zoomed in. Suite 400 was the office of the Heritage Initiative, Marcus Thorne's nonprofit. "It is a kickback," I whispered. "It isn't a consulting fee, it is a pay-to-play." My parents hadn't just paid off a loan. They had paid $100,000 directly to an entity controlled by Marcus Thorne. "Why?" Elena asked. "Why would they do that?" "Because they wanted to be on the plaque," I said, remembering the gala. "They wanted to be platinum donors. They bought their status with my house, and Marcus Thorne likely told them that if they made this donation, he would help them with the loan problems. He played them. He milked them dry. And when they ran out of their own milk, they stole mine." "This is fraud," Elena said, her eyes gleaming. "This is a RICO case. If Thorne is doing this to other families, getting them to liquidate assets to funnel money into his shell companies." "My parents are complicit," I said. "They are not victims here. They signed the check. They are co-conspirators," Elena corrected. "And now we have the leverage. If we expose this, Thorne goes down. Your parents go down. Everyone goes down." "Good," I said. The pressure from the family intensified. My Aunt Clara was the only one on my side. And she was keeping her head down. But the others, cousins, second aunts, people I hadn't seen in a decade, started coming out of the woodwork. I got Facebook messages. "Zoe, I heard about the trouble. You know, family is everything. Money is just paper. Don't throw away your parents over a misunderstanding. Your dad is really depressed. We are worried he might do something drastic. Please call him. Jesus says to forgive 70 times 7. Be the bigger person." It was a chorus of enablers. They wanted me to absorb the blow so the boat wouldn't rock. They wanted me to eat the loss so they wouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of a family feud. I lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, fighting the urge to cave. It would be so easy. I could take the $50,000. I could sign the paper. I could go to Sunday dinner and pretend it never happened. I could have peace. But then I remembered the feeling of the notary pen in my hand. I remembered the text message timestamp. I remembered my father kicking the door. "Peace without safety isn't peace," I said to the empty room. "It is just submission." I wrote it down on a sticky note and put it on the bathroom mirror. "Peace without safety isn't peace." We scheduled a mediation. It was a required step before trial. It was set for a Friday in a conference room at the courthouse. I prepared for it like I was preparing for war. I went to a thrift store and bought a gray blazer and black slacks. Neutral, boring. I didn't want to look like a victim, and I didn't want to look like a high-powered executive. I wanted to look like a fact. I practiced speaking in front of the mirror. Slow, low, no rising inflection at the end of sentences. No, I did not authorize that. That is my signature, but the document was altered. I want my money. I wrote down my 3 goals on an index card. 1. Recover the funds. 2. Invalidate the power of attorney so they can never use it again. 3. Protect the Maple Street house. I kept the Maple Street house in a mental vault. I hadn't told Elena about the trust yet. I was afraid that if I disclosed it, it might somehow become part of the settlement pot. I needed to keep it separate. It was my escape pod. The night before the mediation, I couldn't sleep. I was pacing the motel room, going over the timeline one last time. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was 11:30 at night. I picked it up. It was a text message from a blocked number. Ask where the cash donation really came from. I stared at the screen. Ask where the cash donation really came from. I didn't know who sent it. Was it Clara? Was it someone inside Thorne's office? Was it Deborah Vance, trying to save her own skin? I replied, "Who is this?" No answer. I looked at the message again, the cash donation. I went back to the bank records. I had seen the wire to Orion Consulting. That was a wire, a digital trail. But the text said cash. I remembered the bank statement from February 15th, a withdrawal, $9,000, just under the $10,000 reporting limit. I had assumed they kept it for living expenses, but if they had taken $9,000 in cash and maybe more from their own accounts. I realized then what the text meant. The donation at the gala, the big check presentation, if that money was cash, and if it came from my condo sale, and if it was handed to a nonprofit, it was money laundering. And if I asked that question in the mediation room, if I asked about the cash, I wouldn't just be threatening a civil suit. I would be threatening a federal investigation. Whoever sent the text knew that. They were handing me a grenade. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a prosecutor. I turned off the light. I needed to sleep. I had a family to dismantle in the morning. The mediation took place in a windowless conference room on the 4th floor of the county courthouse. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, a constant, mechanical drone that seemed to vibrate in the mahogany table. I arrived 15 minutes early. I was wearing the gray blazer and black slacks I had bought at the thrift store. I wore no makeup. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I did not look like a victim. I looked like an accountant who had come to audit a failing business. Elena sat next to me. She had a 3-ring binder in front of her, 3 inches thick, labeled Clark vs. Clark et al. "Remember," Elena whispered, her hand resting briefly on my forearm. "They are going to perform. They are going to cry. They are going to look at you with those big, wounded animal eyes. Do not look back. Look at the papers." "I am looking at the papers," I said. My voice was steady. My heart was a block of ice. At 9 o'clock exactly. The door opened. My parents walked in. They were dressed for a funeral. My mother, Linda, was wearing a black dress with a modest neckline and a string of pearls I knew were fake. She was clutching a tissue in her left hand, already damp. My father, Frank, wore his navy suit, the one that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. He looked haggard. His skin was gray, his eyes rimmed with red. He was leaning on a cane I had never seen him use before. They didn't look at me with anger. They looked at me with a devastating, choreographed pity. Behind them trailed their lawyer, Mr. Sterling. He was a man who smelled of expensive cologne and confident, billable hours. And behind him, sitting in the corner like a brooding shadow, was Marcus Thorne. We had named Marcus Thorne and his shell company, Orion Consulting, in the suit. I hadn't expected him to show up. I thought he would send a junior associate, but there he was, wearing a bespoke suit and a calm, predatory smile. He nodded at me as if we were meeting for cocktails. The mediator, a retired judge named Mr. Henderson, no relation to my grandmother's lawyer, sat at the head of the table. "We are here to see if we can resolve this matter without the expense and publicity of a trial." "Mr. Henderson said. "Mr. Sterling, you may begin." Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at me, then at the mediator, his face softening into a mask of paternal concern. "Your Honor," Sterling began. his voice rich and smooth. "This is a tragedy, a family tragedy. My clients, Frank and Linda Clark, are devoted parents. They have spent 32 years sacrificing everything for their daughter. They put her through college. They supported her through job losses. They have been her safety net." He paused for effect. My mother dabbed her eyes. "When Zoe fell ill," Sterling continued, "when she needed emergency surgery, my clients were terrified. They stepped in, as they always have. They handled her affairs. They made difficult financial decisions to ensure that when she woke up, she wouldn't be burdened by debt. And how does she repay them? With lawsuits, with accusations of theft, with a campaign of harassment that has shattered their hearts." He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "We are here because Zoe is confused. We believe her medical condition and the trauma of the surgery has led to a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. My clients don't want to fight her. They want to help her. They want to bring her home." It was a beautiful story. If I hadn't lived the truth, I might have believed it. Elena didn't stand up. She didn't button her jacket. She simply opened the binder. "We are not here to discuss feelings," Elena said. Her voice was dry, cutting through the humidity of Sterling's rhetoric. "We are here to discuss math." She slid a document across the table. "Exhibit A," Elena said. "The timeline." "On February 11th, Elena began, running her finger down the page. "Zoe Clark had a credit score of 780 and a net worth of approximately $250,000, mostly in home equity. On February 14th, 3 days later, her net worth was zero." She looked at my parents. They were staring at the table. "Mr. Sterling claims this was a rescue mission," Elena said, "but rescue missions usually involve saving the victim, not stripping them for parts. Let us look at the mechanics of this rescue." She slid another document. "Exhibit B, the power of attorney." "This document," Elena said, "was purportedly signed at 8:45 p.m. on February 11th. The notary, Mr. Miller, attested to this time in his logbook. However, we have subpoenaed the cell phone records of Mrs. Linda Clark." Elena held up a blown-up screenshot of a text message. "At 8:52 p.m., 7 minutes after the supposed signing, Mrs. Clark texted her daughter, 'On our way. Traffic is bad.'" The room went silent. The drone of the air conditioner seemed to get louder. "How can my client sign a document in the presence of her mother at 8:45, Elena asked. "When her mother was still in traffic 5 miles away?" Sterling shifted in his seat. "A clerical error." He waved a hand dismissively. "The notary likely wrote the wrong time. It is immaterial. The signature is genuine." "The signature is genuine," I spoke up. Everyone turned to look at me. It was the first time I had spoken. "I signed it," I said, looking directly at my father. "But the notary wasn't there when I signed it, and the document I signed was a single page about medical billing. You added the other 13 pages later. You swapped the packet." "That is a lie," my father shouted. He slammed his hand on the table. The cane rattled against the chair. "She is lying. She is delusional." "Mr. Clark," the mediator said sharply, "control yourself." "She is sick." My mother wept, grabbing my father's arm. "She doesn't know what she is saying. The doctor said she would be like this." "Ah," Elena said. "The doctors." She pulled another paper from the binder. "Exhibit C, an affidavit from Dr. Evans, the attending surgeon." Sterling stiffened. He hadn't expected this. Elena read aloud. "I have reviewed the claims regarding Ms. Clark's post-operative mental state. At no point during her hospitalization did she exhibit signs of delirium, paranoia, or cognitive decline. She was alert, oriented, and specifically requested that her parents be removed from her visitation list due to stress. The assertion that she is medically incompetent is baseless and contradicts her clinical chart." Elena dropped the paper on the table. It landed with a soft slap. "So," Elena said, "she wasn't crazy, and the notary wasn't there, which brings us to the money." This was the pivot. I saw Marcus Thorne shift in his corner. He uncrossed his legs. He checked his watch. He was bored with the family drama. but he was about to become very interested in the math. The condo sold for $425,000, Elena said. After the mortgage payoff, there was $212,000 in cash. Mr. Sterling claims this money was used to settle family debts. Let us trace those debts. She laid out the bank records. They were like a map of a crime scene. $50,000 to a bridge loan servicer, Elena said. $20,000 to Visa. $10,000 to a contractor, she looked at Marcus Thorne, and $100,000 to Orion Consulting Group. Thorne didn't blink. He stared back at her with flat, reptile eyes. Orion Consulting is a legitimate firm, Sterling interjected quickly. They provided strategic advice to the Clark family regarding their real estate portfolio. Strategic advice? I asked. My parents live in a duplex. They don't have a real estate portfolio. They have debt. And yet, Elena said, they paid $100,000 to a company that shares an office suite with the Heritage Initiative, a nonprofit run by Mr. Thorne. This is irrelevant. Thorne spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, bored. My business dealings are confidential. This is a mediation about a daughter's allowance, not a corporate audit. It becomes an audit, Elena said. When the funds used to pay you were stolen from my client. Nothing was stolen, Thorne said. I was paid for services rendered. What services? I asked. Thorne looked at me. He smiled. A small, pitying smile. Consulting, Ms. Clark. You wouldn't understand the complexities of distressed asset management. I understand money laundering, I said. The air in the room changed. It wasn't just tense anymore. It was dangerous. Excuse me? Sterling sputtered. That is libel. Is it? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the index card where I had written the text of the anonymous message. Ask where the cash donation really came from. I looked at my mother. She had stopped crying. She was staring at the card in my hand, her face pale. We have the bank records, I said, but we also have the withdrawal slips. February 15th, $9,000 in cash withdrawn by Linda Clark. February 16th, $9,000 in cash withdrawn by Frank Clark. I turned to the mediator. Your Honor, on February 17th, at the Heritage Initiative Gala, my parents were presented with a plaque as platinum donors. To be a platinum donor, you have to donate $25,000. They wrote a check for some of it, but the rest was a cash donation. I looked at Thorne. You took my house money, I said. You cycled it through Orion Consulting to hide it, but then you needed the cash to look legitimate for the charity books. So you had them withdraw it, under the reporting limit, and hand it back to you as a donation. You turned my equity into a tax write-off. Thorne's smile vanished. He sat up straight. He looked at Sterling. Control your client. It is a lie, my father shouted again, but his voice lacked the power it had before. It sounded thin, panicked. Is it? I asked. Because if we subpoena the donor rolls for the Heritage Initiative, and we cross-reference them with the bank withdrawals, and we depose the treasurer, what are we going to find? Dad? My father looked at Thorne. Thorne looked at the wall. The silence was absolute. The noise of the air conditioner seemed to roar. They made us do it, my father whispered. Frank, my mother hissed. She grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his jacket. Shut up. No, my father said. He shook her off. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet. You don't understand. So, it was going to collapse. Everything. The duplex, the car, the reputation. We were underwater. We borrowed money from people you don't say no to. He gestured vaguely toward Thorne, who remained stone-faced. Mr. Thorne said he could help, my father rambled, the dam breaking. He said if we invested in the initiative, if we showed we were serious players, he could refinance our debt, he could save us, but we needed the buy-in. We needed the cash, and the deadline was the 1st of the month. So you sold me, I said. We were protecting you, my father insisted. Tears streaming down his face now. Real tears. ugly tears. If we went under, Zoe, the shame, the humiliation, it would have destroyed the family name. We did it to keep the family standing. We thought once the refinance went through, we could pay you back. We never meant to keep it. We just needed a bridge. I was the bridge, I said. You walked over me to get to him, I pointed at Thorne. And he played you, I said. There was no refinance, was there? There was never going to be a refinance. He just needed your cash to prop up his own failing project. You fed him my life, and he ate it. Thorne stood up. He buttoned his jacket. I think we are done here, he said to Sterling. I am not a party to this domestic squabble. I will be leaving. Sit down, Marcus, the mediator said. His voice was low, authoritative. If you leave, I will mark it as a failure to mediate in good faith, and I will recommend to the judge that the veil of your LLC be pierced for discovery. Thorne hesitated. He sat back down. But his arrogance was gone. He looked like a man calculating exit vectors. My mother was sobbing into her hands. My father was staring at the table, a broken man who had realized too late that he wasn't a player. He was a pawn. I looked at them. I looked at the people who had raised me, the people who had taught me to ride a bike, the people who had sold my sanctuary for a brass plaque and a promise from a con man. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel that rush of adrenaline that comes when you win a fight, but I just felt tired. I don't want the 50,000, I said quietly. Sterling looked up, hopeful. You will drop the suit? No, I said. I want it all. I want the full 425,000. I want the legal fees. And I want a forensic accounting of Orion Consulting. We don't have it, my father whispered. Zoe, please, we spent it. It is gone. If you pursue this, we will be bankrupt. We will lose the duplex. We will be on the street. He looked at me, begging. He was using the old currency. We are your parents. You can't destroy us. I thought about the house on Maple Street. I thought about Grandma Rose. I thought about the sparrow fighting the crow. You are already bankrupt, I said. You have been morally bankrupt for years. The money was just the last thing to go. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my gray blazer. I loved you, I said. My voice didn't waver. I trusted you. If you had come to me, if you had sat me down and said, Zoe, we are in trouble. We are drowning. Please help us. I would have helped. I would have sold the condo myself. I would have given you the money, because that is what family does. My mother looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. Then why? Because you didn't ask, I said. You didn't want my help. You wanted my submission. You wanted to control me more than you wanted to save yourselves. You chose the lie because the truth required you to respect me. I picked up my purse. And that choice, I said, cost you your daughter. Zoe, wait, my father called out, half rising from his chair. Where are you going? I am leaving, I said. Elena will finish the paperwork. You will sign over the remaining assets. You will liquidate whatever you have left. And Mr. Thorne, I looked at the man in the corner. I am forwarding the bank records and the text messages to the district attorney this afternoon. I don't care about the money anymore. I care about the truth. I walked to the door. Zoe, my mother screamed. You can't do this. We are your family. I opened the door. The hallway was bright and empty. It looked like freedom. No, I said, not looking back. You were my overhead, and I am balancing the books. I walked out. I didn't run. I walked at a steady, measured pace. I heard the door close behind me, muffling the sounds of my mother's weeping and my father's shouting. I walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. It was a cold day, crisp and clear. I had lost my condo. I had lost the $400,000. Mostly, I knew I would only recover pennies on the dollar from their bankruptcy. I had lost my parents. But as I walked toward the parking lot, I felt lighter than I had in years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keys to the house on Maple Street, the house my grandmother had left me, the house they didn't know about. I got into my rental car and started the engine. I wasn't going back to the motel. I was going to Maple Street. I was going to introduce myself to Mrs. Gable, the tenant. I was going to tell her I was the new trustee. And then I was going to sit on the porch, watch the school buses go by, and breathe air that I didn't owe anyone for. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. How did it go? I typed back one word, done. I put the phone away. I put the car in drive. And I drove away from the courthouse, away from the past, and into a life that was finally, terrifyingly, wonderfully mine. Thank you so much for listening to Zoe's story. It is a heavy journey, realizing that the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. But I hope Zoe's strength resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below with your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice, betrayal, and resilience, please make sure to subscribe to the Revenge Stories channel. And don't forget to share your thoughts on Zoe's decision in the comments. Did she do the right thing by walking away? I read every single comment and I can't wait to hear your perspective. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next story.